Gentlemen, 1 minute for back and forth.
Let me switch gears and show you this slide, Chris. This is building number 5. It was fully engulfed in fire. Building 7 had a few isolated pockets of fire, which you're claiming brought it down by a natural collapse. Yet Building 5 didn't come down. How come it didn't come down?
First of all, it was a lot shorter, for starters. What was it, 12 stories or something?
Something.
It's almost like a whole different set of rules apply, and NIST has talked to me about this personally. The rules change when things get way, way, way bigger. They can't take a small model and then make it expand to a bigger model. This is a relatively small building, didn't have nearly as much weight pushing it down, and so I would say that would be my first answer off the top of my head. Any other questions?
And why was the evidence destroyed, shipped to China at 400 truckloads a day prior to the report coming out, which claimed that they needed the steel to examine because they had no idea how the building came down, the FEMA report?
Well, we're out of time. Frustrating. Please write that down as a question. I have an answer. This told me about that.
All right. We've got one more question in this segment, and then we'll go to the concluding remarks of our debaters.
Have two.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Access for secret preparation is next.
Okay. That one I don't have on my list. May I borrow yours?
Okay. Well, it's just that.
Would you care to read the question for me? I'm not sure which one it is.
Okay. Well, Chris, a lot of people have wondered, and oftentimes it's the first gut response that people have when they are first exposed to this idea. Well, how could so many controlled demolition devices be brought into these buildings secretly? And so what do you have to say about that? So I'll answer that. If
I'm glad I asked you that, Chris.
Yes.
Before you do, though, if you could repeat it for the DVD, that would be great. The question.
I'm sure it's fine for... Okay, I'm going to put it in my own words.
Yeah.
And the next question is for Chris Mohr. Chris, if a controlled demolition were to take place, it would involve a great deal of preparation prior. It appears that a controlled demolition took place to many people. How could that be vis-a-vis the preparation that would be required?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. If your gut tells you that that would be impossible, my feeling is your gut is right. It would be impossible to secretly prepare for a controlled demolition in a building where 30,000 to 50,000 workers are coming and going day and night, working the New York, London, and Tokyo stock exchanges. And NIST says 1/4 of these survivors from 1993 were still working there. So there was a lot of stories about that first terrorist attack. This is a massively worried workforce of New Yorkers, for gosh sake. The tallest building ever demolished was 26 stories, and 12 people were 24 days doing nothing but loading explosives. The World Trade Center, one tower would require 24 times more work per building, in secret, with tens of thousands of nervous workers around. Now, again, I went back to controlled demolition advocate Tom Sullivan, who talked about this, and he said that linear shape charges would be used. Now, as soon as he starts talking about that, because he thinks that would be necessary for the lateral ejection, I go, well, now you're dealing with welding torches and the smell and the noise of setup. That is not possible. The outer structure supports were right next to the most desirable office spaces on the outside. Explosives that are big enough to eject steel all this distance would have to be way too loud for any of the kinds of things that we heard on any of the videotapes. Remote controls in the core might be difficult for receiving radio signals. Creating shape charges, like I said, is noisy and smelly. And then it's just kind of a strange thing because I've heard contradictory things, and maybe, Richard, you can help clarify this for me because I don't understand it. Either it's a very small controlled demolition secret thing that happened with only 8 or 9 people who did, and everyone else was out of the loop, or it's a really big thing, and I hear accusations going against the mayor, the fire and the police chiefs, the building owner, the BBC, the phony man on the street interviews, several layers of the federal government. I'm sorry. I don't believe that. I don't believe that massive a conspiracy could possibly be pulled off secretly.
Well, let's take one possible look, Chris. Maybe we can figure something out. I agree with you that these buildings were among the most highly secure in the country, being next to the Pentagon. Building 7, for instance, had the CIA, the IRS, the Department of Defense, Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management. So we would expect that some conspirators would be getting together and would have to have the access through security. That security might be involved. Well, not only would security have to be involved, but some undercover operation that would be planting explosives. They would have gotten access, in fact, in an elevator modernization, which did occur in the 9 months prior to 9/11. Ace Elevator had this contract. They worked for 9 months, and in the largest modernization documented in elevator world in March of 2001. This would have given them intimate access to the core columns and beams in the structure, as many men and as much time as they needed. They scattered, as a matter of fact, when the first plane hit, they scattered, and it was quite a scandal documented by USA Today, because they are supposed to stay around and help the firefighters rescue these victims. They're experts in the delivery systems for those rescues. Where did they go? Relative to how these explosives might have been set, remote control operative systems are in place these days. We don't need miles of det cord and so forth. We have an unlimited budget in an undercover operation like this, assuming, as we are prone to in the 9/11 Truth Movement, that there was an inside operation of some sort. We don't know how high it was, how wide it was, but they must have had an unlimited budget. So we don't know the capability of the ignition devices that might have been used.
Thank you,
We
Richard.
do know that they had the capability to survive fires because thermites are not set off by normal office fire temperatures.
Okay, before the 1 minute back and forth, a point of clarification I think is in order. While this segment is to be about Building 7, obviously we have strayed into the World Trade Center towers. But because both of our debaters did the straying, I'm going to allow it to stand. So you may continue back and forth.
Well, okay, first of all, obviously I can't possibly debate against some dark secret thing that is a technology that we don't know. I mean, that's out of the question. I do want to ask you, Richard, though, do you think that it was just the core columns in the tower that had all this stuff happening? Because if so, that doesn't really explain the squibs. It doesn't explain the fact that these explosions were heading out in such a great distance. It doesn't explain the destruction of all the concrete and everything, the pulverization of all the concrete. Where do you think that these things, that all these things were secretly put?
Yeah, my speculation is that they were placed in the core, and that's why we have the massive explosive event in the Twin Towers, which is different than Building 7, because they had to have enough explosives in there to not only blow out the core, but the floors, and that extra force is what blew out the
And those
perimeter.
nice little tiny squibs that came out were because of the massive explosion that went off accidentally in the middle of the core?
We're going to have to leave it at that because we have one more question here in this segment. It's going to go to Richard Gage, and it deals with foreknowledge of the World Trade Center 7 destruction. Mr. Gage, I hear that they knew in advance that Building 7 was going to collapse. There seems to be numerous examples of that.
Well, let's take a look. We have foreknowledge as one of our corroborative evidence points, including these mysterious construction workers and the police officer caught on CNN television, for which there's very little explanation other than advanced foreknowledge of explosions that are going on.
Keep your eye on that building. It'll be coming down. Building is about to blow up. Move it back here. All right, guys?
We are walking back. It's a building about to blow up. One flame and three coming down.
Chris, why are these construction workers and police officers telling us that the building is about to blow up? And why is there a countdown here from Kevin
At the
McPadden?
last few seconds, he took his hand off, and you heard 3, 2, 1.
Do fires bring buildings down to countdowns? I should go into that business. Why is the BBC announcing the collapse of this building 20 minutes before it happens. They apologize for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. Does that make them psychic? Why does CNN announce the collapse of the building at 11:07? Listen.
In New York, Alan Dodd-Frank joins us on the phone in Lower Manhattan. Alan?
Alan, just 2 or 3 minutes ago, there was yet another collapse or explosion. I'm now out of sight. A Good Samaritan has taken me in on Duane Street. But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down. The street filled with smoke was like a forest fire roaring down a canyon. Now, as I think Patty Sabga and others have told you, all of Manhattan is covered, downtown Manhattan is covered with thick...
Why does the...
Richard, you're out of time. Sorry. And now Chris Mohr will respond for 2 minutes.
There was foreknowledge of destruction, and I want to show a slide, and this is worth a lot of time to read this. This is from Fire Chief Nigro. I feared a collapse of Building 7, as did many on my staff. The collapse of World Trade Center 1 damaged portions of the lower floors of 7. Building 7 was built on a small number of large columns, providing an open atrium on the lower levels. Fires on many floors of World Trade Center 7 burned without sufficient water supply to attack them. For these reasons, I made the decision, without consulting the owner, the mayor, or anyone else. As ranking fire officer, that decision was my responsibility, to clear a collapse zone surrounding the building and to stop all activity within that zone. Approximately 3 hours later, World Trade Center 7 collapsed. Conspiracy theories abound, and I believe firmly that all of them are without merit. Now, there are others. Deputy Fire Chief Peter Hayden, we have that here. We have another firefighter who said it was fully engulfed. The whole building, there were pieces of Tower 2 in Building 7 and the corners of the building missing. You could see flames going straight through from one side of the building to another. That's an entire block. Deputy Chief Peter Hayden, we saw the bulge in the southwest corner between floors 10 and 13. We were pretty sure she was going to collapse. At the edge of the south face, you could see it was very heavily damaged, said John Norman. Fire Captain Chris Boyle, Butch said, forget it. There's creaking. There are noises coming out of there, so we just stopped. And at 5:20, number 7 finally falls. There's a stampede. All these firefighters are waiting with their pickaxes and oxygen tanks to come in, and they're heading out towards the crushed fire trucks. They're looking for their brothers, says an ambulance driver. These firefighters, you know, they didn't hear Richard Gage's little mantra about how no steel frame building has ever collapsed. Hundreds of their brothers had just died, and they were looking at a structure that was also deforming, and they were using these very simple devices to determine that there was irregularities in the building. And just like they're so used to seeing buildings about to collapse, they see those kinds of structures falling apart, and they said it's going to go.
1 minute, please, back and forth.
If Building 7 was massively damaged on the south side, why did NIST come back and say that the damage was not a significant factor? The damage, the building, the onset of collapse started all the way on the back side of the building at column 79.
Well, that's great. Sure, that there was not, NIST admitted, because they were being honest, that there was not major structural damage that caused this. But one of the things I want to say to you, Richard, stop beating up on this BBC reporter. She was sitting there saying, look, what we're getting is very, very sketchy, and she was right. She had a bunch of people, her colleagues were sitting there watching TV stations. They weren't getting firsthand information anymore. She said that the towers have collapsed, but the correct news was given by ABC News, and I was watching that, and ABC News said that the firefighters are saying it looks like it's going to collapse. So stop blaming her for that.
So how about CNN?
Same mistake.
The fires hadn't even started yet. There's no structural failure yet at 10:45 in the morning. Doesn't make sense. Was the building supposed to go down at 10:30, 10:45 in the morning? We wouldn't have seen the massive collapse.
These are rhetorical points, apparently, because our time is up for any answers on that.